Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. This is me, Nadia Rajput from Desi TV USA. Let me take you to the special report. A national ethnic media briefing was organized under the auspices of Ethnic Media Services, the topic of which was student debt forgiveness, the good, the bad, and the ugly. One of the country's biggest names in student loans is Adam Minsky, Shepard Zampini, a big name in the field of higher education and their policy. Belonging to the office, mental health consul, and social worker Virginia Brown were included in the media briefing. Let's see what happened in the briefing and what the speakers gave the briefing.
News conference. I'm Pilar Marrero, and I'm associate editor for Ethnic Media Services and your moderator for today. Student debt is the second largest form of consumer credit next to mortgages. And today, more than 45 million people owe nearly 1.7 trillion. It's hard to even say this number, dollars. Every 26 seconds, one of those student loan borrowers defaults on their loan. The effect, it's not just that people can spend their whole lives deeply in debt, sometimes into old age, but that it generates further economic, gender, and racial inequality in our society. Over the last few years, the Biden administration has tried to ease and expand on student debt forgiveness programs launched over previous administrations, achieving some success in the process, but continuously facing legal challenges from Republican states that have halted an extensive program unveiled in 2021 and threatened to do the same with one released last year. In the meantime, borrowers still have options if they are low income, have paid up for a decade or two, or have worked on public service jobs. But the loan servicing panorama is complex and plagued by lax regulations and sometimes bad actors. A panel of experts will explain what programs are still on the books, which ones have been stopped or threatened, and the future avenues for college affordability and equity. Our distinguished speakers today are Adam Minsky, attorney, writer, speaker, and national voice on student loan law, senior contributor at Forbes.com. miShel Shepard Zampini, senior director of college affordability at the Institute for College Access and Success. It's spelled TICAS, T-I-C-A-S. And Virginia Brown, a mental health counselor and social worker who just retired and was able to move closer to her family thanks to debt forgiveness. We asked speakers to speak slowly for our interpreters in Spanish, Mandarin, and Korean, and we asked reporters to enter questions in the chat. Later today, we will send all participants a video of today's briefing and expanded bios with contact information for speakers. We begin with Adam Minsky, an expert on this issue, who will speak to us about the recent history of loan forgiveness, how the current administration has expanded, created, and implemented programs, and the results they've gotten so far. Mr. Minsky, you have about 10 minutes.
All right. So there's a lot to talk about. So essentially, the Biden administration has taken I would say broadly a two-track approach to providing debt relief. They've tried to provide sort of what some have referred to as mass student loan forgiveness or broad, widespread student loan forgiveness. And they've also tried to implement what they call targeted relief by improving, reforming, tweaking existing programs. The first attempt at broad debt relief, which would have wiped out up to $20,000 in student loan debt, in most cases $10,000, but up to $20,000 in student loan debt for millions of federal student loan borrowers. That program wound up getting challenged by a coalition of Republican-led states led by Nebraska and Missouri. Those challenges made their way up to the U.S. Supreme Court, which last June struck down that program as basically going too far. It was a split decision 6-3 with the conservative majority, saying that Congress did not expressly authorize mass debt forgiveness. under the HEROES Act of 2003, which was the statute that the administration based that program on. The HEROES Act essentially gives the Education Department authority to enact emergency regulations in response to economic harm caused by a national emergency. In this case, it was the pandemic. And while the statute does expressly say that the department can waive nearly any rule or regulation governing federal student loan programs, the Supreme Court essentially held that, well, it doesn't expressly say massive debt forgiveness, and they applied some doctrines that allowed them to essentially strike it down. So despite that setback by the administration, they've still managed to approve upwards of $153 billion in student loan forgiveness for somewhere around 4.3 million borrowers. And that has been done through several separate initiatives. One of the big ones is a program called the IDR account adjustment. This is a temporary waiver that essentially allows the department to credit borrowers with time toward 20 or 25-year loan forgiveness terms under income-driven repayment plans. Basically, there's a bunch of income-driven repayment programs that allow borrowers to pay based on their income. And if you don't pay off your loans in full at the end of 20 or 25 years, any remaining balance would be forgiven. However, those programs have been mired in problems for a long time, including poor servicing, lack of oversight, inadequate record keeping, which really made it difficult for a lot of people to access these programs, stay in the programs, and ultimately get the relief that they were entitled to. So the fix is this IDR account adjustment that has essentially allowed borrowers to get credited with past periods of repayment, as well as some prior periods of deferment and forbearance that otherwise wouldn't have counted towards the 25 years. And the result—
Adam, can you slow up a little bit for the interpreters? Thank you.
No problem. I'll slow down. So what they can do is it allows borrowers to get time credited that otherwise wouldn't have counted. Some borrowers will essentially shave off some years in repayment as a result, but close to 1 million borrowers at this point have already received enough IDR credit to get them past the 20 or 25-year mark, letting them actually get their loans forgiven. So that program has been a huge success, at least in my opinion. It's still ongoing, but it is going to wind down in the next couple of months. Another set of reforms and changes involve the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program, or PSLF is the acronym. This is a program that can provide loan forgiveness for borrowers who commit to working in careers for nonprofit organizations and government agencies at the state, federal, local, or tribal level. This can provide loan forgiveness in as little as 10 years for borrowers who complete program requirements. But just like under IDR, there have been a lot of problems with the administering of PSLF. The program has had complex rules, again, poor oversight. Servicers have been accused of not always implementing the program correctly or adequately. And the result was that up through 2020, there was like a 99% rejection rate, and only a few thousand borrowers had actually gotten approved for loan forgiveness. What the Biden administration has done is they've implemented a number of initiatives. They put forth the limited PSLF waiver a couple of years ago, which relaxed some of the rules to allow borrowers to get some retroactive credit towards the 120 payments or 10 years worth of payments that are needed to get loan forgiveness under the program. A lot of those flexibilities have since been extended by the IDR account adjustment, which is the program I was just talking about before, which can also benefit PSLF borrowers. The administration also implemented new regulations that went into effect last July that do a number of things to improve PSLF, including providing more flexibility on periods of repayment that can count, as well as certain periods of deferment and forbearance, and eliminating some pitfalls such as consolidation, resetting the clock for people, which was a big problem before. So the result is that PSLF has gone from something like 7,000 total approvals ever as of 2020 to close to 900,000 approvals through last month. So just an absolute sea change in terms of the effectiveness of that program and the number of borrowers who have been approved. Certainly, I've gotten a lot of clients who have gotten their loans ultimately approved for forgiveness through PSLF, and it really has been life-changing for them. We've seen some other tweaks as well to other programs, including borrower defense to repayment, which can provide loan forgiveness for borrowers who were misled by their schools, as well as, the total and permanent disability discharge program, which can provide relief to borrowers who are unable to maintain gainful employment as a result of a medical condition. New regulations for that program went into effect last July, which again makes it easier for people to access that relief. So between all these sort of so-called targeted initiatives, the collective result is that a lot of people have actually received loan forgiveness. It really is unprecedented. Again, over $150 billion in relief for over 4 million borrowers. Now, obviously that's good news for a lot of people, but it still is a fraction of the 40 million student loan borrowers that are out there. And so the administration is also basically taking a second shot at trying to implement broad-based debt relief again. So their sort of so-called Plan B is essentially a different route towards trying to achieve broad-based debt cancellation. This time they're going to be using a separate legal authority, different from the first plan that got struck down by the Supreme Court. This is under the Higher Education Act, which does expressly allow for the waiver or cancellation of student loan debt, although it's only been used in fairly limited circumstances to date. But under the proposed regulations that were just released this week, there will be 5 possible pathways to relief for borrowers under this new plan. That can include borrowers who have experienced runaway interest because their payments haven't been high enough to cover interest, or they were in long-term deferment and forbearances. This can include folks who qualify for or are eligible for forgiveness under existing programs, but for whatever reason have not enrolled. That could be income-driven repayment. That could be public service loan forgiveness. There will be a track for borrowers who first entered repayment 20 or 25 years ago, 20 years for undergraduate loans and 25 years for borrowers who have any graduate school loans. So designed basically to wipe out the debt for people who have had these loans burdening them for a long time. Another category of borrowers for folks who went to what the department calls low-value programs or low-value institutions. These are institutions that might have lost eligibility for federal financial aid because of low graduation rates or poor outcomes, such as not being able to line people up with good paying jobs. And then there's going to be a 5th category for borrowers who are experiencing some sort of hardship. We're still waiting on the final regulations for that aspect of the program, but it looks like there'll be several ways of demonstrating hardship, whether it's income, expenses, other debts, age, disability status, eligibility for other government programs. So this program is not live yet. The final regulations were just published. There's now a 30-day period for people to submit comments, and then they'll finalize the regulations after that. It sounds like the program could go live as early as the fall, which is good news for borrowers, but most people expect this will be challenged in court as well. I think officials hope that because this is through a different legal authority and they went through this long process of developing rules for it, that it stands a stronger chance of surviving a legal challenge, but we'll have to see. One more thing that I'll note is that the Biden administration has also created a new income-driven plan called the SAVE plan, which is by far the most affordable income-driven option ever created. It has a higher income exemption, so people who are not earning much money don't have to pay anything, and then it has a more favorable formula for borrowers who earn above that initial exempted amount. SAVE also can shorten the loan forgiveness timeline to as little as 10 years, as opposed to 20 or 25 for borrowers who borrowed small amounts of debt, primarily geared towards people who went to community colleges and other 2-year trade schools. The SAVE plan is now subject to 2 separate lawsuits brought by 18 Republican states. including some of the same states that tried and succeeded in blocking Biden's first mass debt relief plan. Those are very new suits, so we'll have to see how that plays out. But as of today, at least 8 million borrowers have already enrolled in SAVE, and there's already been tens of thousands of borrowers who have been approved and received student loan forgiveness under that early or accelerated loan forgiveness 10-year timeline. So we'll have to see how that plays out. But bottom line is there's been a lot of forgiveness already approved. A lot of people have already received life-changing benefits from this. But there's still a lot of borrowers struggling, and the Biden administration is taking another stab at trying to provide broad-based relief. Well, I think you're on mute, Pilar.
I'm so sorry. Thank you. That's a great overview. Thank you so much. What is the argument against loan forgiveness by those who are suing?
Well, I mean, there's sort of policy arguments that people make, and then there's the specific arguments that some of the states are making to try to strike down these programs. The policy arguments that we sometimes hear is that it's unfair or it burdens the taxpayer. Of course, student loan borrowers are taxpayers, so there's that. The states are making the argument basically that they're going to be financially harmed by a lot of people getting student loan forgiveness because they won't, there's a number of ways they're trying to demonstrate that. It doesn't, to me, always make complete sense, but one main argument in at least one of the suits is that they claim that people getting early loan forgiveness under SAVE will make it harder for them to recruit people to work in state government to access the public service loan forgiveness program, which doesn't quite make a lot of sense to me, but that's the argument that they're making. But ultimately, the argument that they're trying to get at and that they're trying to get courts to agree with is that basically Biden is exceeding authority delegated to him by Congress by enacting these programs. They're trying to strictly interpret, the statutory text for some of these programs and arguing that nothing really provides for the scope of relief that they're trying to implement.
We have a question in the chat from Henrietta Burrows. Henrietta, ask your question, please. Henrietta, is she being unmuted? Okay, I'm going to read the questions. She's asking, are schools that have misled student borrowers being held accountable? If not, why not? And why are they not on the line to reimburse students?
Well, that's complicated. In some cases, schools close before they can be held accountable, and then that leaves borrowers with the debt that they took on with no valuable degree. And so the burden falls on the Department of Education to address those situations. What I can say is that under new regulations governing the Borrower Defense to Repayment Program, which the Biden administration rolled out last July, there is a mechanism for the Department of Education to seek recoupment from schools for borrower defense claims. However, those new regulations are currently enjoined by the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals following a legal challenge by a coalition of schools in Texas. And the Fifth Circuit recently ruled just a couple of weeks ago that they expect that challenge to have a high likelihood of succeeding, which could ultimately result in those regulations getting struck down. So in short, the Biden administration has been trying to hold schools accountable, but the schools are fighting back. And that is now mired in an ongoing legal battle.
Of course, of course. There's a question by Orhan Akurt. Orhan, can you ask your question? Orhan Akurt?
Yeah, yes. Do you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes, basically my question is, I know the Biden administration approach on the forgiveness of the student debt. So do you think this is the fair approach to students who already paid their debt? I mean,
if the question is this a fair approach to people who already paid their debt, I mean,
yeah.
certainly that's a common criticism of these programs is that it's unfair to people who have already paid their debt. I'm not an arbiter on ethics or morality, but what I will say is that in general, I think an approach to trying to alleviate burdens for people doesn't really it might seem unfair to people who alleviated the burden themselves previously, but that doesn't stop us from implementing measures and programs to help people out. For instance, there were people who saved for retirement before Social Security came around, and we still implemented Social Security so that people would be guaranteed some sort of retirement income. At the end of the day, even though you could argue it was unfair to all those people who spent their lives saving money for retirement on their own, we still implemented a program to help people, and generally we think that that was a good thing. I think that could be a similar analogy, maybe not a perfect analogy, but a similar analogy to the student debt crisis.
Great. Thank you, Adam. I'm going to move on. I know you have to leave at some point. Just let me know when you have to leave. And in the meantime, hang around. Maybe if you can answer questions in the chat, do it. If
Sure.
not. All right. Thank you so much for that great explanation. Now we welcome miShel Shepard Zampini, who will give her perspective about the challenges facing these programs and address the potential impact of loan forgiveness on past borrowers, students, and particularly communities of color. miShel?
Thank you. I had many pieces that I think Adam has already covered, so I certainly want to leave room for questions that folks have, since it's a lot of information. But
Yes.
I will just start by giving an overview again of kind of the landscape that borrowers are facing right now, and also wanted to talk about the effects of the pandemic and the student loan payment pause that borrowers were benefiting from up until fairly recently, and just give kind of a more holistic perspective on what it's like from the student loan borrowers and how they've experienced all the coming and going and the various proposals from the administration, and what that looks like, not from the policymaker side, but from the side of the borrower, and from the side of communities that are struggling with the burden of student debt. And so what we have seen is that there have been, as Adam outlined, significant actions from Washington, D.C. and from the federal government to try and address the student debt crisis. But the effect of many of those actions has been borrowers are very confused about whether or not they will be receiving student loan forgiveness, what the parameters are and who is eligible for what type of relief, what the consequences are for non-payment or being not able to make monthly payments, as many borrowers are facing right now, and what the future holds, especially in an election year, depending on whether the administration changes over after November. And so what we have seen in a lot of conversations with folks and a lot of surveys is that when borrowers came out of the pandemic payment pause, which, just to back up for context, from March of 2020 through the fall of last year, borrowers were not required to make any payments on their federal student loans. And so there was no interest accruing on the loans and payments were not due. And this was part of pandemic relief efforts across both the Trump and Biden administrations. That was a financial lifeline for tens of millions of borrowers, and many students and borrowers and their families and their communities at large who had previously been struggling under the weight of those payments were able to, for the first time, in some cases in many years or even decades, they were able to have some financial breathing room that not having to make those payments allowed them. And so transitioning borrowers from not being in repayment back into repayment was an unprecedented task for the federal government to undertake. And alongside that, the administration wanted to give borrowers some relief and some safety valve to say, we're going to at least recognize the burden of this debt and attempt to do this broader cancellation effort, which Adam spoke to, that was overturned by the Supreme Court. So there have been a lot of different versions of communication that individuals have been receiving that say, you will receive forgiveness, and then they say, never mind. And then they say, there's a new program available, but it's less generous, or it's less money forgiven, or you thought you were eligible, but you're not. And the requirements are all somewhat different. They're all very confusing. And while the administration is working within the boundaries of their authority, it is difficult, I think, from the borrower's end to understand where all of this leaves them. Add on top of this, the creation, again, Adam walked us through the details, the creation of the new repayment plan, which is called the SAVE plan, and is something that I think has gone under the radar. And I would like to highlight again, the SAVE plan is not a student loan forgiveness proposal. It's not this mass student loan cancellation proposal, but it is a way that borrowers can be in repayment on their loans and keep their loans in good standing in a more affordable way. And so it looks to say, for many borrowers, the monthly payments on their debt are too high for them to afford. And we have seen and documented cases where many students are and families are struggling to decide between basic living expenses like covering their rent, covering their food expenses, covering childcare, healthcare, transportation, all of these necessary bills for basic living expenses are competing with their student loan bill. And so in recognition of that, we have seen the Biden administration say, we would like to create a way for your monthly payments to be low enough that you are not choosing between childcare payments and student loan payments. It's separate than this one-time kind of writing off a student loan balance entirely, but it is a way to make loans more manageable for families and less of a financial burden over time. And as part of that, the payments are lower than they ever had been before. There are different benefits where interest rates are covered. If your payment does not fully cover the interest that's growing on your loan, the federal government subsidizes that for you. And then depending on your loan balance and depending on how many payments you've made, there are much shorter terms to having your balance forgiven versus previous plans. And so there are really a lot of different ways that the Biden administration and Congress are trying to work within their authority to say, we recognize that there are many, many families and communities, and especially communities of color, we see struggling the most here. There are many communities that the burden of student debt is simply too high. And we need to try and figure out as many avenues as we can to try and to address that. Some of those avenues are more big and splashy, and some of them are smaller and more detailed and require a little bit more parsing out of how the benefits apply to who and how to access them. But taken together, there is a very large effort to create this relief. And even if something like this new bigger proposal for a larger forgiveness program, even if that is not able to move forward due to legal challenges, there are other things like this new repayment plan that hopefully taken together will create more of that safety net for borrowers.
miShel, thank you so much. So these loans are the loans that we're talking about are mostly federal, or are there private loans also involved?
Yes, so about 92 to 93%. So the vast majority of outstanding student debt is in the federal student loan program. The rest is through private loans, which are loans made by banks, made by credit unions, and in some cases, they're made by states have their own student loan agencies. So when we talk about any of these programs, for example, that the Biden administration is putting forward, they only apply to those federal student loans, which are, again, the vast majority of loans borrowed, but there are many borrowers who do also have private student loans that are not eligible for any of this relief.
And it's important to put in perspective, why is a student loan debt so heavy and so high right now when that wasn't the case decades ago? I just want you to address that, and Adam, if you can also.
Sure. So essentially, we have seen the cost of attending college has shifted more and more over the past several decades from a public responsibility to a individual private student and their family responsibility. And so more than 75% of students who are in undergraduate programs attend a public college in this country. So again, the vast majority, more than 3/4, and it's even a higher percentage more than 80% of students of color attend a public institution. And so over the past several decades, the cost of tuition and fees and other college-going expenses to attend a public institution have shifted onto the backs of the family. It used to be the proportion of the payment was covered a lot more through public funding, through state funding for their state colleges, and also through federal funding for things like the Pell Grant program. That has shifted for many different reasons, some of them intentional policy decisions, some of them broader economic forces at play. But for a number of reasons, we are now asking students and their families to cover a much higher percentage of those costs than ever before, while at the same time, because of many of the same factors, those costs have increased significantly. So you have a combination of higher costs that are not as subsidized by public funding, that now students and their families are being asked to cover those. And for the vast majority of families, they do not have savings available and liquid cash available to cover those costs up front. And so that is where we see the student loan program come into play. And the student loan program is an important way that students can access college. And I think it's important to note that without it, many students would not be able to go to college at all, but it has become a replacement for other types of funding, mostly public funding, that would enable students to enroll without needing to borrow so much.
Thank you so much. And for Adam, I don't know if you want to add anything to that, but I also have, yeah, if you want to, go ahead.
Well, I mean, I did see a question in the chat, there's how did we get here? And then, why are we only treating one part of the problem? And I think that's a fair question. And the answer, unfortunately, is our current system and the current state of polarization and politics and near even division in Congress between the two parties. It is the reality is that as miShel said, I think the Biden administration is trying to stay within the bounds of what they can do, in terms of existing legal authority. Biden can't write new legislation, authorizing new funding for colleges without congressional approval. I know that was a big goal of the Biden administration when, before the midterm elections. But even with, Democratic control in both the Senate and the House, narrow control, but control, they weren't able to get that passed. There was a lot of opposition to that. So, all this is to say, I think he's doing what he can to try to address the burden of student debt, but it's absolutely correct to point out that if you wipe out some student debt now, but we don't fix the underlying problem, we're just going to be right back where we are now in a few years. So I do think it's going to take some sort of grand compromise, both at the federal level, but also at the state level, to reinvest in public education and to reduce the reliance that families are, currently have when it comes to having debt-financed education as opposed to grant-financed education.
Is public funding of higher education going down, or like in California it's going up? I'm sorry, going down.
Oh, sure. It really is on the state level, it depends on the state. So some states are maintaining or increasing funding, and some funding has declined over time and continues to decline. There was also a lot of aid from the federal government to colleges and states during the pandemic in the form of a number of very large pandemic funding packages that sent a lot of money to states. But a lot of states are now facing the end of that funding, and so are looking at making cuts or not being able to invest at the same level that they might have over the last several years. So what we saw during the pandemic was kind of an unusual sending of federal money to states that will not continue over the next several years.
There's a question in the chat. Are undocumented students able to take these loans, to get these loans?
So
any-
undocumented students are not able to access federal student aid, which includes federal student loans. I will say that DACA recipients are able to apply through the FAFSA if they have a social security number. So that is one caveat there. But undocumented students and those without a social security number are not eligible for any form of federal student aid. However, they are eligible for some state aid programs. It again depends on the state.
Okay, I know Adam has to leave, but before you go, is there anything you'd like to add, Adam, just in closing?
No, I mean, I think obviously this is a vibrant discussion. It's a very important policy question that needs to be addressed because, it's a major problem. I think that, yeah, I mean, it's a $1.7 trillion problem. And so, like we've been talking about, I think that, we're seeing some solutions that have been making a really big difference to borrowers. And I think that we have to acknowledge that. But until we see actual structural, meaningful reform to the entire system, we're going to be stuck in this cycle of debt for a long time, which is not a good place for young people to get started.
And is there anything in terms of policy that you think would make sense?
I mean, if there's a way to make college super affordable and give people a pathway out of student debt, to keep it simple, I mean, that's what I would like to see. But, I think obviously, given the system that we have, it's going to take some compromising by all sides, I think, to reach a resolution.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Very helpful. Thank you so much.
Appreciate it. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. So let's move on and let's go to our third speaker, Virginia Brown. I'm going to have a little conversation with her about her case. Virginia, welcome.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me. This important topic, which is I've been very passionate about sharing my experience with people because a lot of people, because of not knowing what to do, can't get the help they need. I moved from Venezuela in 1990. I was a physician with a master's degree in ear, nose, and throat surgery over there. And I'm US citizen because my dad was American. I spoke English and I couldn't find a job when I moved here. So I had to do what every immigrant does. I clean offices, I watch children. I got a childcare class to be able to work at the school where my son went to, and he was almost only 5 years old when I moved here. So after the second year I was here, I said I had to have another profession here where I can feel like how I felt in Venezuela. I was a professional. I like going to school and I want to do something different. So I found mental health counseling. That was something that was appealing to me because I always loved helping people. And then I decided to take a student loan because having a master's degree in my other country, I could not go back to a bachelor's degree. I couldn't find assistance for free school, any kind. So my only choice was to take a loan. And in a private college in Orlando, Rollins College. So people thought I was crazy. You're going to get into all this debt. But I said that was my only choice. So I went and got my loan and I went to school. And as everybody said, we didn't make a lot of money working in social service and nonprofits. And then I had 2-3 jobs in certain time. And I had to do deferment for a few semesters and on and off deferring my student loan payments. And what happened is the interest kept growing and growing and growing. Even when you're paying, it's more interest. So, to make the story shorter, I ended getting into more than $100,000 debt because of the interest I was paying, but it kept growing like happens with credit cards or when you buy a car. And then when I found out that working in social service, I was able to get my student loan forgiven, which was during the Obama administration. I start contacting direct loan, Fed loan, and my loan was transferred to a private bank. So the first step I had to do was transfer to the Fed loan. They helped me through the whole process. They were very helpful. They're always helpful when you call them. And then it was transferred, refinanced through the government, through the Fed loan. And then I start paying toward my forgiveness. The only problem was nobody explained to me that I had to apply for the income-based repayment plan also. So I lost 2 years of paying for student loan. And I ended up paying 12 years before I got it forgiven because not knowing. So it's important to people to know that you need to be calling and asking and going online and find the information, because that's what I've always been involved in, trying to figure out the new laws, everything that happened. So when I found that, I applied for that and sending paperwork on time. We used to call it paperwork because you had to scan it, but after now everything's electronic. But it's very important to keep track of everything. I had to send my tax information every year, or give them authorization to go to my tax information, and they did it every year. I had to ask my company where I worked for some documents to be signed and scanned and sent to the Fed loan on a regular basis whenever they asked for it. I think it was every 6 months, can't remember now. So the time went by and I was always contacting them. How is my paperwork? Everything on track? And I got to the point that 6 months before my student loan was ending the 10 years or 120 payments, I started doing the process. Everything's in the website, and you start doing the, it's like a application for the forgiveness. And during that time, I didn't get an answer. And then I kept calling, and then there was a document that had a problem with the signature. So they told me that. So that went back 3 months more. That was I expecting. So I'm talking about 2021. That was when my forgiveness was done. But I started in 2020 at the end of the year. And then when I found out everything was missing, the agency I worked for was very helpful. And finally, I completed everything. And about 3 months later, one night I get the email and I get emotional saying your student loan have been forgiven. And I couldn't believe it. And I kept reading it and sent it to my son and told him, hey, read this. I'm not dreaming. So it got forgiven in middle of 2021. And I tried going into the account, and the account was closed. That was the final message to tell me, yeah, you don't have any student loan anymore. So that is my story. And I hope it helps somebody.
Okay, Virginia. Thank you very much for that story. So you are now how old?
I'm 72, and I'm reading a
You
question
look
here.
great. It's okay. I'll read the questions. I'll read the questions. Don't worry about the questions.
Okay.
You're 7.
The impact, well, the thing that hurt me most was that I wanted to leave Florida, and because of the student loan, I couldn't get another job in where I'm now, Jersey City or New York, because I was stuck with the student loan and having to work with a nonprofit and couldn't work in anything else. So I couldn't retire or get move to another state until I got the student loan forgiven. It was like I was tied up to that student loan.
Virginia, so guys, there's a question for her in Spanish, and the reporter would like the response in Spanish to record it. So what I'm gonna do is to ask her in Spanish and then interpret for you all, okay? So Virginia, Aitana, you puedes hacer tu pregunta. You can ask your question. Aitana Vargas. You need to unmute Aitana Vargas. Please unmute Aitana.
unmute. ¿Me escuchas ahora, no?
Sí, claro.
Virginia, muchas gracias por tu testimonio. Quería preguntarte, quería hacerte dos preguntas. Una es, ¿qué impacto ha tenido en tu vida el tener que pagar una deuda tan elevada durante tantos años? Y por otro lado, si en algún momento has tenido que elegir entre pagar esa deuda académica y hacer frente a otros gastos, bien sea el comprar alimentos o el tener que pagar facturas médicas. Muchas
Okay,
gracias.
let me interpret that. Thank you, Aitana. So Aitana is asking her for her response in Spanish. What has been the impact in your life of having such high debt during so many years? And have you ever had to choose between paying the student loan and paying other things like food or medical bills? Virginia, ¿puedes contestar en español?
Sí, bueno, sí tuvo un impacto muy grande en mí porque muchas veces sí tuve que decidir entre comprar comida, a veces pagaba la electricidad un mes, otro mes no, cada 2 meses, precisamente porque tenía ese student loan que pagar. Y esa fue una de las cosas más difíciles, las facturas que no podía pagar por pagar el student loan. Y mi impacto más grande fue estar atada a una ciudad donde ya no quería vivir y que tenía que estar atada a un trabajo sin fines de lucro para poder terminar de pagar el student loan hasta que me lo perdonara y no poderme retirar.
Okay, let me translate that. So she said the impact on her day-to-day paying bills was great. She often had to choose, for example, choose not to pay the power bill one month and then yes, the following month, things like that. And one of the most difficult things was the fact that because she had such a high debt, she couldn't really decide about her future. She had to stay in a city she didn't want to stay in. She wanted to be closer to family where she's now, to her son. And so she wouldn't have been able to retire like she is now. Gracias, Virginia. Okay, let's move on. Entonces, ahora, I'm sorry, I'm just changing the chip for Spanish to English. So Virginia, thank you for sharing your case. What do you think was the most important thing that helped you get through this process?
The most important thing was getting all the information and being on top of whatever law came out and asking people and going online and reading every article I could read, going to other Zooms like this meeting that even when I didn't participate, but I was able to learn from other people. That was very important for me.
Thank you. miShel, do we still have you with us? Hi. Are you there? Okay. Raymond, do you want to ask your questions? Raymond Tyler? I can.
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
It may sound like I'm angry in the chat. I'm not angry at you. I'm just angry at this situation. It seems really. But anyway, my first question is because I want to share this with my readers. Before I even decide to go to college, what should I know about taking out student debt? And what's the first question I should ask?
That's for miShel.
Oh, that is a really good question. I think a student, if I were advising a student, I would say, make sure that you are learning all of the information you can about the college and the program that you are looking to enroll in. Look up information to make sure that it is likely to be a program that will provide you a valuable degree that will help you earn more money after you get the degree. And based on that, borrowing federal student loans to cover those costs can be the right option, but make sure that you do your homework on the school and the program that you're looking at, because there are a lot of colleges out there that are eligible for the federal student loan program, but if you look up their graduation rates, if you look up their job placement rates, they do not do a good job of setting their students up for success. And so I would advise a student before they pay any money, before they borrow any money, really be thoughtful about what institution you're looking at.
Thank you so much. Do you have any advice, Virginia? Virginia?
Yes, that's important. When I went to get my master's degree, I was also informed to make sure it was an accredited college. That was, that's what I went to, one of the best ones. I know it was very expensive, but it was Rollins College. I had taught classes in the medical field at a college in Orlando that was not accredited. And I know from many students that they they lost a lot of money because they had to start paying the student loan, and that college did not offer. I quit that job because when I found out what kind of programs they had that were not very good. So then they couldn't finish their career. They closed the college and they ended up getting involved in that debt. And I understand that's one of the programs that Biden has been working on, helping that people get forgiven.
Yeah, I don't refer to that. miShel, in terms of the cost and the future affordability of college, what's the horizon? Is there public support for any changes there? And who's making money with all of this? Why is college so expensive? And also the loan servicers, aren't they all like companies who also benefit from all this?
So I will start with the affordability piece. I think there is strong desire among everyday people who are looking to Washington for leadership on why college costs so much and what we can do to lower the cost and how we can support students so they don't have to take out this amount of debt. I think there's a lot of public support for that. I think it becomes harder when you look at Congress. I think it's an uphill battle with some policymakers and some people in charge are not looking to invest more in students and are not looking to invest more in college. And so it becomes difficult when you have compromises that you have to make and when lawmakers have to work with different parties that disagree with them. But I do think there is public support and public buy-in. And my job is to advocate to people in Congress and to people in the White House to say, you have a responsibility to the students and the families that are your constituents. They are really concerned about this and really struggling with this, and you need to do something about it. So I think there is a lot of buy-in and a lot of pressure. In terms of who is benefiting from the current system, because the loans are made by the federal government, it's more complicated than just to say, oh, it's a bank that's making money off the backs of students or they're earning interest or anything like that. It's a lot more complicated than that. And I think where some of the conversation is starting to turn is there are a lot of questions about college's role here, and are colleges providing value for the costs that they're charging, and why are tuition rates continuing to go up, and what kind of things are colleges spending that money on, and really trying to get to the bottom of, is there a value proposition there for students and their families? And if not, what is the role for lawmakers to set some additional regulations and requirements to kind of stop the spigot if schools are taking advantage of the program and taking advantage of students? So I think we do see a lot of momentum there to say colleges need to be held accountable for providing value, and colleges need to be held accountable instead of just getting essentially free money from the federal government and then not really having any accountability on the other end as to whether they have served a student or whether they have saddled a student with debt that they're not going to be able to afford to repay. And so that, I think, is really the next part, the next place this conversation is going to go, is how do we, not to vilify colleges, but how do we make sure that colleges are behaving in the interests of their students rather than behaving in their own financial interests?
Virginia, do you feel that the college you studied here in the US was of value to you?
Say again?
Was the master's and other studies that you had here in the United States of value to you? Was it valuable enough to get into $100,000 debt?
Well, yes. What happened is working for a nonprofit and social service, not very well paid. So even when it was valuable, because I had jobs that I liked and I did a very good, important service to the community,
Yes.
but the pay was not enough to
Yeah.
pay a student loan. It was a time where if I didn't have the income-based repayment plan, I would have to pay $900 a month of student loan.
Wow.
So
But
that's
yeah, but that does, I see your point. So it was a valuable job that you were doing, and you
Yeah.
like. Okay, got it. Okay, there's a question here by Henrietta. I'm gonna ask it in the interest of time. Maybe miShel can answer. Since you overpaid in interest, are people eligible to be repaid any of the interest payments? I don't know any program like that. Do you, miShel?
No, I'm not sure if that question was for Virginia or not, but that is not typically the case. You're typically not reimbursed for payments once your loan has been written off.
Yeah. Well, like Adam said, that is the system we have now,
Yes.
and so everything else is an idea that this time it may come. What could be the potential impact of the 2024 presidential elections on all of this, miShel?
I think very significant. I think we have a very good sense of what the Biden administration priorities and goals are in terms of college costs and student debt. And so if President Biden is reelected and that administration continues to be in power, I think they will just continue to do and try to advance the proposals they've been doing. If the administration changes, I think we have heard the platform from the other side is not to invest any more in students, not to invest more in student aid, not to invest more in the Pell Grant program, to cut funding, if anything, from some of these aid programs. And likely based on the challenges that we've seen, the legal challenges and congressional challenges from the Republican Party to all of these debt relief programs, they are likely to try and overturn and put a stop to any of these debt relief programs that are in place. So that could even include the repayment program, the income-driven repayment program, the SAVE plan, that could be repealed. That could include additional measures to stop other loan forgiveness programs, things like that. So I think the stakes are very high for students who are looking to college in the future, and also for those who have student debt, because a lot of these programs are dependent on who is in the White House, and they are not forever programs. They are not protected by law in a lot of cases. And so they can be overturned, and they will likely be overturned, or they will try to be overturned if the administration changes hands.
This is an important question that I missed in the chat, but I just saw it. And there may not be enough time to answer, but why is higher education free in many developed countries, but not in the United States? Well, that is the question, is it? Have anything to say?
I would like us to change that. I think a lot of people would like us to change that. And I think we probably need another hour to get into that.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. And we only have 2 more minutes. So before we go, I want to thank you both for this very, very interesting discussion. If you have any final thoughts, Virginia, for our reporters, advice, thoughts for other borrowers who are in this situation?
just be on top of everything you can about being informed, everything that's going on, because that's the only way you can get your student loan forgiven or get assistance in any type. Be informed.
Yeah, I agree. Last words, miShel?
I would like all of this to change, and I hope we can continue making college more affordable and providing student debt relief for as many students as we can. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Thank you to both. Sandy, you want to say anything?
Just this was extremely informative. Thank you very much. You really opened it up. It's an issue one thinks about and reads about, but you brought us right inside. So thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone, and have a good weekend. Thank you, Virginia and miShel.
That's all for now. Keep watching Desi TV USA. Please like, subscribe, share, and comment. And don't forget to watch our channel DTV NN and log on to our OTT platform DTV Flix to explore over 3,000 channels which we provide.
अल्हम्दुलिल्लाह, आपकी इमदाद गजा पहुंच रही है। जिंदगी बचाने वाली अशिया, पानी, खुराक, कंबल और तिब्बी देखभाल की फराहमी जारी है। अहम इमदादी अशिया मुसीबत ज़दा लोगों तक पहुंचाना जारी रखने में हमारी मदद करें। हेल्पिंग हैंड USA की इंसानी इमदादी कोशिशों में शामिल हो जाइए। अतियात के लिए QR कोड स्कैन करें या स्क्रीन पर दिखाई गई वेबसाइट विजिट करें।